This is a live mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the second live mic check. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, welcome to the Kennebunkport Planning Board, August 1st meeting. We have a full complement of board members, so we're in good shape for that. So the first issue is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. And anybody have any comments about them other than they were wonderful?
Tom, I sent one note to Tricia that on the second item for 41 Ocean, the minutes included that Steve Doe, in his overview, said that the elimination of the garage was one of the items that were being proposed by the applicant.
That had already been done.
And in fact, that had already been done. So I suggested to her to strike that that line if everyone's agreed. She said if we approve them conditionally, she'll make the change and get them into Lisa.
Why don't you move that?
Accept the minutes as modified.
All in favor?
I was not here at last meeting, so
Okay,
maybe.
you guys still vote there, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, on to the agenda. Now, first item is item 180601, Mary Banks Strom Revocable Trust, Atlantic Environmental Authorized Agent for approval for a 3 by 20 foot dock and an 8 by 10 foot float. This is the public hearing. So you will introduce yourself again and proceed.
My name is Lisa Vickers with Atlantic Environmental. I'm here representing the owners of property at 86 Ocean Avenue. It's Mary Banks Strom Revocable Trust. They have an existing garage, which I actually learned used to be a boathouse, and it has a deck that extends partially over Chicks Creek, and they'd like to put a seasonal dock there that consists of a 3 foot by 20 foot long ramp, aluminum, and an 8 foot by 10 foot seasonal float. It's constructed out of AccuDock, it's called, and it's a lightweight composite. That will be secured in place with cross chains that'll extend back underneath the deck. And there were several items that at the last meeting that were brought up just to go through. I did reach out to Inland Fisheries and Wildlife just to get an idea about the habitat, their maps at least. And it is not mapped for moderate or high value tidal waterfowl. And we recognize that wildlife does use the area, but the owners currently use the site for paddleboard, kayaks, and there's been some health issues with one of the owners, had several surgeries, and so they are looking for more safe access to get down to the water, because as it is, photographs show that there's ledge and rock in the area, so they'd like to have sort of a safe partial tide access to Chicks Creek. I updated sheet 2 to show the elevations that include the highest annual tide, mean high water, and the bottom of the float, basically where it's sitting. Using the mean high water, it's about 4 feet of water at your day-to-day high tide, so consistent with a couple hours on either side of that to utilize the creek. We looked at shortening it, and I should have recognized this at the last meeting, but if you look at the photographs submitted, there's the ledge, and that extends out to the mixed coarse and fines with the rock interspersed in there. So we can't shorten it. The float would sit at an angle, and also you don't want it bumping up against that ledge because it's a lightweight float, and it would get ruined pretty quickly. So we have extended it, basically just beyond that ledge to sit in the excuse me, the mixed coarse fines. And I did take a measurement just using aerial imagery from the edge of the float to the rock edge, the rock outcrop that's at an angle there. And it's about 82 feet, and I updated it with the thread of the creek just to be able to show any sort of navigation issues, and with the photographs also demonstrate how the thread of the creek goes away from this property. See, it goes like this. And I also added the existing docks that are in the creek. There is, I have a label. Yeah. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6. One was recently approved. That's 2 doors to the north. I estimated based on what I found in the record for size. That had a permanent portion, and the float was about double the size of this one. So that extends about 30 feet out. So you can see there's varying lengths, which ours is, if you consider just the dock itself, which is the 20-foot ramp and the 8-foot wide float, it's 28 feet. So it's pretty consistent with the docks within there. So those were the items that were asked for at the last meeting. And to take any further questions or clarifications.
Well, I guess the 20% number still comes up as an issue that we have to take care of some way or other, since it says that the planning board may modify the length requirement, if it seems reasonable or something. But so I think we have to actually vote on that piece of the puzzle. So I don't know if anybody has any other issues with this.
I just want to make sure I understand what you just told me.
Sure.
I think I recall that the dock protrudes 31.4 feet, and then you said from the end of that to the closest land is an additional 82 feet, right? Mm-hmm. By, aerial projection.
Sure.
And I have to say that looks pretty much like the GIS maps as well. Mm-hmm. So that says you're going to take 27.6% of the way across is the way I computed that. Is that consistent with your figures? In other words, if you're taking 31.4 of 113.4, then you're protruding 27% into the channel, not the 20% that's requested.
That is if you consider the most narrow portion, which is not directly across. So,
no, I
so your question is looking at the rock, the closest point. Yeah. How much overage is it percentage-wise, and you calculated?
Yeah. And looking at the regulation, again, not being the author of the regulation, sure, but looking at what I understand and believe the intent to be, you're looking at not restricting the channel mm-hmm. to passersby, to other users.
Sure.
Right? So I think what makes sense is to say, let's swing an arc from where you are. What's the closest land? That's where you want to go make that measurement, not the average. Now, interestingly enough, the channel actually gets a little bit narrower, a little bit further down. In fact, mm-hmm. it's almost like if you put this dock at the extreme edge,
which would work,
which of the property, which
right.
which you can't.
Absolutely.
You wouldn't be able to put in a dock that you liked there.
No, right.
At the 20%. But if you did, and you put in a 20-foot or a 19-foot dock there, you would restrict the channel at 20% to less than 82 feet, mm-hmm. to 76 feet. Mm-hmm. And that would be fine mm-hmm. per the regulations. So it's kind of an interesting puzzle we have here. Mm-hmm. It really is saying when there is water in the channel, when it is usable mm-hmm. by others, are you making it, is it usable by others right. at that point? I still don't have a feel for where the water is. I mean, we're going to measure across from here to there. Mm-hmm. Most times when you look at it, there's no water in there. Mm-hmm. But when there is the water in the center? Does it fill that entire area? Or is there a narrow channel up the middle of it?
At high tide,
yes.
it does fill. There is water throughout, underneath even the applicant's deck at times.
So when it would be usable by paddleboarders generally, it makes sense to measure across, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, that's typically what we do. And, I had an error. I kept saying bank to bank. Kennebunk has a similar regulation that they say bank to bank. This ordinance says actually across a body of water. So that's even less
That's really clear.
defined,
Yeah,
you
I
know?
understand.
So, I mean, typically, like I said, with bank to bank, we would always measure it the highest annual tide to the highest annual tide to get a number to see if we meet that 1/5. Across the body of water,
But really, that's part of why I came back to thinking, what's the intent of this? And it really says, you've got a place that's usable, you're gonna put a constriction in it to people that are going by. I think measuring to the narrowest point is what makes sense. Now what we have to say is, since that isn't the 20% that's requested, is it still okay, given that it is really the only viable way of putting in a usable dock on the property? So I think that's what's
the question.
up for discussion on the board.
Well, I think when you add that extra length on a very narrow channel, what you end up doing is restricting the time that other people can use it, because it's not just going to be high tide. It's going to be as the tide is rising and falling, how much of a channel there is there, and how much you're going to block.
I'm not sure I follow that. I think if it's filling,
If it's filling,
right?
you've got a dock out here. Okay.
Speaking to
If it's filling and you've got a dock out here.
Right.
You know, there's only so much of the width that people can use. So you're looking at high tide, the top of the tide, basically, and how paddle boarders can get around and how easily.
Right.
But with a longer dock, you're actually restricting the time of use when it's filling and when you're getting ebb tide.
Right. And by longer, just to be clear, we're talking about 10 feet, right? Nominally.
I'm sorry, what was that?
If you wanted the difference between 20% and 25%, are we talking
Yeah,
10 feet?
yeah, I'd
Some-
have to do the
something
math,
on
but
that.
somewhere around there.
Yeah. So Nina, I take your point, but I'm not sure that, again, given the fact that the channel is narrowing shortly thereafter anyway, and that would be a legal implementation, I don't know that that's compelling. It's just worth considering.
It's compelling to me.
I understand.
Because I think if you're going to give a variance, you ought to give it on a body of water that is much wider and allows people to go around and doesn't restrict their use. I think this is a very problematic place to put a dock. Besides other considerations, my usual considerations on a place like Chicks Creek is that it spoils the scenic view. We get a lot of tourists that go up and down there. And
One other question I have with respect to this issue of passers-by. It isn't too much further when this body of water closes down and goes to nothing.
Yes, sure.
Right.
Yep, at this
I mean, it's
time.
just,
Correct.
let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 house lots down, 8 or 9 house lots down. So it's,
It comes around the corner up to where Deborah and Randall Simon live, right at the end of the cove there.
right. And to Nina's point, we do see a lot of duck activity
Yes,
down
we
in
do.
that area. But I'm just saying, I've never seen a paddleboarder go up in there. Anybody who's paddleboarding is going out toward the river.
well, you can't very easily unless it's high tide.
That's right.
At high tide, people along there do have kayaks, and they
Yes.
head out down the creek from there.
Right.
But
Are
they've
there
got a
people-
limited window when they can go in
Are
and
there
out.
people south of this dock that do that?
I did not see any docks on the aerial, but there is, and you might know, if you're local to, there is that deck that is out there.
There's one at the foot, I've seen in somebody's lot down there.
Yeah, they do go out on, but not with a dock.
Right. So there is some use.
So there
Yes.
is some use,
Right.
and this would restrict it.
Somewhat, yes.
Shorten the time, if not,
Help us out
To
here.
an earlier point, it depends upon, let's look at rather than high tide or low tide, what's medium tide? does this sit right in the middle of that medium tide channel and then restrict usage to people who are farther south? Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Right.
Or is it on
And
the edge of where it is at medium tide?
I think that's a great question. In other words, is it a V that's filling
Well, I
up
mean-
sort of from the center, or is it?
This is, the red is indicating the thread of the channel, so, I mean, if you're using this, you know, certainly at high tide, yeah, I mean, you could go from, you know, side to side. Sorry, it's hard to see. I did submit, you might have it in maybe, yeah, the additional submission, but okay. Oh, so that's okay. So, I mean, you do have, you know, certainly could go here and here, and then it does, there's a rock outcrop that it narrows. But as the tide starts to lower, you know, you're gonna be forced to go out this way, you know, away from the dock, because, I mean, there's just no water there as the tide is starting to lower.
So let me see if I can paraphrase here. At the entry to the property, the channel is toward the opposite bank. It's not in the center, but
Correct.
toward the other side of the property, it's just about in the center of the channel.
I would say that's accurate, yeah.
So it's not, to your point, it's not closer to the dock
Right.
than to the far shore.
I mean, and if, you know, the tide is up here in this area and people are using it, when there's sufficient water, I mean, there's nothing that would prevent them from kayaking or paddleboarding around. It's not gonna block access, you know, to get, let's say they wanna get up there. And again, as the water goes down, the thread is further away, so I don't see why they would be using that area.
So even at low tide, there's water along that red thread there? So there's always water?
It drains out pretty good. I mean, but there is, you can look at an aerial and still see that thread, so, but it does definitely drain
Your boots
out.
would get muddy.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it won't stay dry, but
Okay.
I think, yeah, doing a comment.
But you could walk there.
Tom, if I might?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. For the record, my name's Ralph Austin, and I'm here tonight with Lisa representing the Strome Revocable Trust. And I just wanted to make a couple of comments that I hope doesn't complicate or muddy things up. But if you look at the ordinance, there was no pun intended on muddy up. But if you look at the ordinance, it's very clear that it talks about extending across the body of water. And I understand that there is a point here where it's closer than if you go straight across, but if you extend a line, you extend it in the direction that line is going. You don't extend it at an angle, you don't draw an arc. And so if you take that dock or pier and how it's positioned or would be positioned, if you extend that across the body of water, that's what the ordinance calls for. If they said measure to the nearest point of land, the ordinance could have said that. And certainly if the board disagrees with that and feels it needs to modify that, it has the authority to do that. But to me, a clear reading of the ordinance, you really have to go across the body of water. That's 181 feet straight across, and it meets that 20% requirement. As far as any impact on boating or any boating activity, the River Committee has also looked at this. They're the ones who are really charged with protecting the waterway and other boaters and recreational users, and they've looked at it. They approve this, and I think that's something the board at least needs to take into consideration when it makes its deliberations. Thank you.
Excuse me, Ralph.
Yep.
I knew the selectmen had approved the application. I hadn't seen anything about a river committee.
They did.
Looking at it. It's in the record?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well. Okay. So it really comes down to interpretation of that paragraph, I think. Most everything else is pretty well sorted out. So,
Yeah.
I still feel that it's restricting the width of passage, but, you know, 'cause mostly, because when you look at the picture, the other picture, you see that this is like right across from the suddenly widest part. I mean,
Oops.
that's the guy.
Yeah.
And there's a
You know,
big,
sorry.
the big outcropping there, so. But,
Tom, I apologize for not having seen that this was in the package before, but, I mean, it goes to this point explicitly. That the
Yes.
River Committee took it on themselves to say that they have reviewed the revised proposal based on new info regarding average river width dimensions to determine if the proposed dock met the 1/5 rule. After reviewing the new info, the committee was satisfied with the averaged river widths, and the proposed dock would be within the 1/5 rule. The committee voted unanimous approval. So they did address this sticking point.
okay.
By that same token, if that dock were located here and extended by a line here, it would clearly be too close to that other shore. But if we took an average at that point and averaged out its distance over here, we could make the same claim that an average was acceptable.
Right.
So I looked at that particular point, and if you made that measurement, and I looked at the GIS maps just to eyeball it, you would be restricted to having a dock that was only 19 feet long, right? And if you said I can live with that, you would be restricted, the rest of that channel directly across would only be 76 feet across, which is, and we would approve it based on the 1/5 rule, straight across. And
Improve the way it went through part of it, probably not anything else. But-
Yeah. I'm just saying, we're not saying that there's a hard and fast rule here that 82 feet is too narrow,
Yeah,
because the very same rule would let us approve 76 feet
yeah. Okay, so,
on the same property.
so the question is, since, based on what what's been said here and what's said by the River Committee, would you then say that we do not need to modify the length requirement since since the River Committee has already agreed that this satisfies the 1/5?
No, I wouldn't agree to that. I don't think that they are the governing body, only one that's interested and knowledgeable.
Right.
I think that we, as a board, need to decide amongst ourselves how we interpret the regulation. And I, for one, believe that the spirit of it goes to narrowing the usable path along the river. So I don't think going with an average is, in general, something that's going to fly. If you've got, suppose you had a particularly long stream bed that was going up right across from you, I don't think.
No, and I don't agree with the average concept either. I think Lisa's firm adopted that as a conservative approach.
I understand.
My position is you measure straight across. It says extend across.
I understand.
And as a surveyor engineer, if you have a line that runs a certain way and you extend that line, you extend it in the same direction. You don't angle it off either way.
I hear you.
I understand that may not be how you feel what the intent of the ordinance was, but there would have been an easy way to draft it to say no more than 1/5 of the way to the nearest bank on the other side, or nearest point on the other side, and they did not do that. So, no, I don't think...
I think we're talking about...
For the reason mentioned earlier, I don't think the average makes sense.
Where's the other side of the body of water? And you're basically saying it's
Straight
the
across.
it's the first sighting of land in a projection from the
Yeah.
pier, and I'm not going along with that. So that's all.
I'm just looking at the words
I
extend
hear you.
across.
To that
You
same
made it
point,
clear.
if you were to have a dock 40 feet going this direction, assuming that's about 212 feet, I could have 40 feet going there, and it would effectively block the channel. If I chose the straight line approach.
That's right, that's right. So I don't think that's
Excuse me.
what we want to do.
I mean, you also have the authority to not approve something like that because of that exact situation. You can say, no, your dock has to go straight out from the land where it's at, and in that case, it wouldn't meet the requirement.
I believe what we have the authority to do is modify the length requirement to say that this is fine with us, or not. But I think we still have to, we have to modify the length requirement if it is demonstrated that no other reasonable alternative exists.
And I think that we believe that this is a viable situation in keeping with the spirit of what else has been done on this body of water.
Are there other docks that are sticking out longer than that?
So Lisa, could you show us that other map?
And the one that was most recently approved to the north, again, that had a permanent pier portion. I couldn't find the length of the ramp, but their float, again, was double in size. So, I mean, that right there, it's a 10-foot by 20 float. So that does extend further out. I don't have the numbers for you, though.
But that one's on a much larger portion of the body of water.
I mean, it's right here, and again, I don't know how they handled that, did you look at this? Because I don't think it would meet the one with there, but.
If you looked at the narrowest point, it doesn't seem like it's a lot different.
Right, and so, yeah, there's one here that has actually several floats, and that, again, obviously some of these are older and most likely grandfathered, so, that's a small cove. This one was fairly recent, again, and that had plenty. This one is older as well.
Well, but every time
And this one, sorry, that one
and
too.
then every time you used your pencil to illustrate the axis of the dock, you drew a straight line down, to indicate that the distance that was taken into consideration for the length of the dock was an extension of the line through the dock, right? I mean, that's
Correct.
the issue here. And the other thing that comes to mind is that for the height of tide that makes the dock usable, then it's also usable for the water depth is great enough that other, like paddle boarders or even boaters, could use it to get around the dock, right? So what are the users who would experience a reduction in use if that dock went in? I mean, are there any other current users who would actually be excluded from using that body of water if this dock went in?
I mean, I would say no, again, for the reasons I outlined before, where if it's high tide, the dock is fairly close to this person's shore, and, I mean, you could easily boat around the float. As the water goes down, again, you're going to be forced away, so I don't see any reason why people would be in mud, so there's no reason why you couldn't go around. You're not blocking any sort of access or channel or ability to get around. Like let's say people came in under the bridge, and they're not going to be stuck because the dock is sitting there. And again, I think the photographs too sort of demonstrate, you can see the ledge, and you can see it's going to sit just beyond that. So, they can only go so far. I mean, the hat goes under the deck. People are not going to be kayaking under somebody's deck. So
when the dock is resting on the soil,
mm-hmm.
what's the water depth in the middle of the channel?
When the dock is,
Yeah, so the tide's dropping
Yeah.
and the dock's sitting on, so how much water?
Extreme
how
low
much-
tide, it's probably 3 inches, right?
yeah.
No. Well, no, as soon as the dock hits the soil.
Uh-huh.
Medium tide.
No, I
Or
don't know
whatever
what tide
it
it is.
Yeah, it would be about a mid-tide.
So how much water depth is left in the rest of the channel?
I'd have to go out and look at that, but I mean, it's,
Like 5 feet?
no, less than, I'd have to go look.
We're really
I
asking-
I don't wanna guess on that, and
Is the contour at the
It's-
bottom fairly flat, or is it steep?
the
channel.
majority of the channel, let me see if I can find those photographs just to direct you, that sort of shows the, excuse me. Fairly flat, particularly if you look at the original submission, photograph 2, you can see it's flat. There's a slight, if you look at photograph 3, I mean, it's relatively flat, and then there's just a slight decline down into that thread of the channel. And then again, photograph 4, again, just looking to the north, you can see it's flat. And this is at a low tide, so you can see there's just a little bit of water in the thread of the channel.
So I guess what do we want to do?
Just a thought, procedurally, it sounds like, so we're looking at, at least what I'm hearing is we're looking at number 15
Right.
in the ordinance.
Yes.
We're dealing with the 1/5 component. So procedurally, you all as a board may need to make a decision in terms of what your interpretation of that is. Either, I think you need to decide on what your interpretation is going to be. And then if you decide that, it doesn't meet the 1/5, then I think the next point of discussion is the next sentence there, which is, deciding on whether or not you're going to modify the length requirement, under the guise that it's demonstrated that no other reasonable alternative exists
And one
to
way we
provide
would
water
modify the
access.
length requirement,
That's
by the
right.
way, is declaring average being okay. Because that's a modification of the length requirement.
And again, but I think that's, as a group, you all should probably specify what, that interpretation and maybe take a.
Because that's the
maybe take a
interpretation
vote
the
on
river
that.
committee did.
I'm not sure I want to go down that road and make that precedent. I mean, I think,
Well, that is what, if you read the last page of the original section.
I understand, but again,
That is what the river committee said.
the river committee does not, dictate, I guess, our role here. It helps. It's helpful.
Mr. Chair, since Werner brought up procedural, I know you'd get there probably, but before the board makes a decision, his public hearing probably should open at some point to the members of the public.
Right.
Well, yeah, we're still trying to figure, I will.
Okay, I just want
But
to make sure we
we're-
didn't lose that in the
Yeah, no,
process.
I mean, I felt that we had to deliberate further and then obviously open it.
Could you, just so we have clarification, can you put up the other picture with the distances across the way? Because really, we're just talking about one potential, depending on our interpretation of the ordinance, we're talking about one distance, and that's the bottom distance, correct? All the other distances across meet the ordinance. So if we look at
No, it would be these two.
those two,
Yeah.
okay.
Real quick on that.
And probably here, if you were to average out that as well, but that's the short one.
I think that would be okay.
Would it?
Well, if you measure from,
Yeah.
it's further, well, well, I don't know. Starting here, I guess this line is 137. Correct.
But if you're doing an average, this goes out into the basin, so there's a really long shot out there of about 300 feet. So where do you in fact average if you're gonna average? If you average the entire
That's
arc,
right, if you really think about it.
or just average selected distances.
But it doesn't talk about averages. And the question is where you put the across.
Right.
And the across doesn't necessarily mean if you put a dock like this, it has to be directly across there. You have to look as a group at, you know, the ordinance is meant to not restrict travel, and whether that dock does restrict travel. You know, you have to look at, you know, shorelines are never, you know, like this. I mean, there are some that the Army Corps of Engineers makes, but shorelines are never like that, okay? They go like this. There are bends, there are turns, there are rocks, there are outcrops where ledges are, and we have a lot of ledges. And you have to look at when you put that dock out. You know, if you want to say across, you maybe have to say across from this angle, this angle, this angle, should it meet every single one of those criteria for somebody coming up in navigation?
Not necessarily being influenced by which exact angle the dock is pointing
Yes,
toward.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I think that's where that thought that says directly across falls apart, Ralph. In my mind, I was trying to go through your argument.
But what it amounts to, wants to be like 30% instead of 20%, some number like that.
27.6
A lot, somewhere between 20 and 30.
was what I came up with.
Okay, so I mean, if we are willing to go with that number, 27, whatever, or 28%, is that something that the board is willing to go with in this case? Ignoring, not making it an average, it's a smaller number. It is.
I think before we go down that road, we need to at least satisfy this section of the ordinance that there are no other reasonable alternatives, that this is the only reasonable alternative that exists. Sorry to do that to you, but I
Is
mean,
not having a dock a reasonable alternative?
You know, the way it's worded, I thought, was that a reasonable alternative for gaining access to the water.
Okay.
right.
That's,
So,
In other words, should the dock be shorter or put someplace else?
yes,
right, so we...
demonstrated no other reasonable alternative exists to provide water access from the lot. And they already have water access from the lot.
You came last time, and you did explore a shorter dock, and I think you said based on the geometry and the ledge, you ruled that out.
Correct.
Is there another place to put the dock rather than off of the deck?
Well, I mean, we looked at the property and, you know, again, the reason we cited it here was because when we, again, read the ordinance thinking across, it's like, if their shoreline had looked like this, we would have advised them that you don't meet the ordinance, you sincerely request you waive that, or modify the length requirement, but it wasn't something that we would probably advise because we try to be consistent with this ordinance. And so thinking, okay, this is an ideal location because we have that distance. And then if you look further to the north of the shoreline, photograph 6 shows it fairly well. They have it's marsh vegetation, and then it's ledge outcrop, and that's the most narrow portion of the whole creek. So that's just not an ideal location at all. And then again, if we went further, their property line is right here. So it's just more narrow there. And
Right, you have to be, what, 25 feet in from the edge of the
right,
property anyway?
exactly, from the
so
repair,
you
right,
can't
correct.
But-
Yeah,
but
that's
on-
another, yeah.
Around the corner there, though, where the creek starts to widen out, is there,
Mm-hmm.
you just can't walk down to that and put a pier in there?
There is, let me see if I have the survey. If you look at photograph 1, which is the aerial, it's not ideal, but what you'll see is, you can see the garage, the red arrows pointing out the garage, and then just to the north, moving further into the creek, is just where you have that ledge outcrop that's shown in photograph 4. And yeah, I mean, it would be a large, it just would not be an ideal location, because this is the widest part of the creek, and if you look at that ledge outcrop, you would never make that distance.
The question is, I guess, before us is to determine if, as you just stated, is there no other reasonable way to get to the water from this property? And taking into account that the river committee thinks there is. So they're a
Thinks
point.
that this
They're not
is,
the,
thinks this is a viable way.
that's right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe at this point, we open it up to public hearing
Yeah,
and
why don't
have
we do
discussion
that?
after
I'd
the
like to
fact.
open up the public hearing if there's anyone who's, any abutters or people interested in speaking to this. All right. I'm going to
That's right.
close the public hearing in that case. And that
didn't help.
didn't really help, but anyway.
So, previous planning boards have dealt with this, have dealt with this element, this language here about what this reasonable alternative, looks like.
Yes.
And in a number of cases, what that is translated into has been, when a dock went to the maximum length of 100 feet, there was some type of natural constraint that was there.
So they had to go to 110 or
That's
something.
right, so they proceeded just a little bit more just to get, beyond that ledge
Mm-hmm.
constraint, and so that's been, what I've seen, this board in the past, how that's been applied. There's been some type of a constraint that didn't allow for, what was deemed reasonable access, for a float or for the boat, to gain access, so. And again, in a lot of cases, it was a ledge outcrop or some type of natural topography issue, that didn't make it reasonable, and the extensions were fairly small. So in some cases, yes, it was maybe extending another 10 feet, just to get on the other side of a ledge or something like that, so.
So you're
Again,
saying-
not that you're bound by, previous decisions, but that's been,
So coincidentally, here, the reason we can't make this dock shorter is because of a ledge outcropping, and so because of that, we're on the order of 8 or 10 feet long.
it's not
It's just coincidental?
well, it's not an uncommon scenario
I
in the
see,
river.
all right,
That's
Interesting.
been dealt with before.
okay.
But
That's good,
just-
good information.
Just to give you some history in terms of how it's been, how
Okay.
that piece has been used.
So, I guess we need to say something, we need to
Like it.
do something here, I guess.
Yes, please.
And there's no way to make it shorter? It can't rest on the ledge?
No, I mean, you would have the float at an angle, and again, these are lighter weight floats that you you get some sort of chop in there or anything. I don't know that there's much for wake, but if there was, you'd have that banging against the rocks, and it would wreck it pretty quick. So, and you just don't want a float sitting on that angle anyway. It's just not a safe to have it like that. So.
Well, I mean, it's going to be floating when you use it.
Yeah, but I mean, just in general, just sitting on the float. I mean, what if they have their kayaks on there or something, and then it's just not in marine construction. You wouldn't want your float sitting on an angle like that.
Can the float be?
It's just and considering the ledge again. I'm sorry, sir, but it just you just don't want to have it banging up against the rocks.
And they don't have any kind of float with a bottom that can handle ledge? There's none made?
I mean, what you normally say these AccuDocks, which is one of the appeals of this, is because you can hand carry that up. So, you know, you can easily carry it into the garage. You could do a wooden float, you know, it's with pressure treated, CCA treated. It's you know, tough, but still, it's just not how, then we'd have to figure out a way to get the float out of there, which we're just trying to keep this as low impact as possible. I just want to make a point too about this. I had previously mentioned the bank to bank, and so I had taken that measurement of 31.4 from the hat. But if it's just extending across a body of water, I mean, the actual length of this dock, you know, it's a 20-foot ramp with the 8-foot float. There'll be a portion of that ramp that is resting slightly on the float, very little in this situation. So let's just say overall it's a 28 feet. I mean, the 114, for 1/5 of that is 22. So, you know, you're looking at about 6 feet if you just look at the actual structure of the float, the dock overall, the ramp and the float extending into there. And we initially had a longer ramp, again, because 20 feet is a very short ramp. And so 6 feet, I mean, it would just, if you look at photograph, let me see. Photograph 5 again, I mean, you could see that the ledge and the rock right there, you would be pushing it back quite a bit, and it's just, it's gonna, you know, it ruins that equipment pretty quick, especially something as lightweight as an AccuDock.
So did I understand you to say that this is, if we took the most conservative application of the regulation to the nearest land, we have to look at 28 feet plus 82 feet? No, would leave 82 feet,
Correct.
right? So what percentage are we at?
Well, I was looking at that ordinance standard about how it extends across a water body. So if I'm just solely taking just the ramp and the float, not considering where I had measured back from the water being further back,
Yeah.
it's 6 feet beyond the 1/5 rule at that 114, the narrowest portion. I mean,
And even at that, that's the part that is over the water,
correct.
and maybe even less than that if you considered that we're measuring at an angle,
Yeah.
not parallel to the dock, but to the right.
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 And, yeah, so I took that measurement of the end of the float to that outcrop, and that was what I recently submitted. Yeah, and that was about 82 feet.
And there's no way that the float can, or excuse me, that the dock can rest out farther on the float? That the float was tucked back underneath that a little bit? Or this was moved backwards?
Like backwards. In this type of system, you have that, the ramp kind of, usually you have an overlap, like with a wooden float, you would have about 3 feet of the ramp sits on the float. But again, with this system, it's just designed that it's just right on the edge there. There's not much overlap. I mean, we could certainly look into something like that, but again, we're only working with 8 feet. It's only, 8 feet at that point. We're not going to get it back 6, to meet the 1/5. It would be, at most, I would say, like a foot.
Right,
If I
I
could do
think it's
that.
important that we remember we're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet. When we talk about percentages, I think it sometimes biases us a bit
Yeah.
here, 20 versus 25. I'll come back again to the thought that using this conservative application, if you were to try to put in a 20-foot dock at the far edge of the property, if you could, legally, it would restrict the channel to 76 feet,
Right.
even narrower. It's not that this is violating the spirit of the law. We're talking about, I liked what Werner just said. We're talking about living within the constraints of a varying shoreline and the practicalities of it. I'm inclined to say that this is is viable in that respect.
I tending to agree with you. I think exactly how we word that is for the next meeting.
That's
And Scott's responsibility, unfortunately for Scott.
thank goodness.
I don't know, I mean, Scott, for instance, what, you haven't said much here.
Well, I think if you drew that, and I know it's literally, because that whole thing kind of looks like this. I mean, it's,
Right.
so if you just took the hours in a day, whether it's, 2 hours from high tide before that, and 2 hours after high tide, that people could traverse that channel, I think once there's not enough water to go use that channel, I think what you'd find was that during that whole time, before, while it was still full enough, you could go right around that dock. So I'm just, for the practicality point, I don't think it's going to be an obstruction. It's just a thought. The way the water just kind of pools, it pools away towards the middle. And by the time it gets, too far down, nobody could use it anyway.
Yeah, correct.
That's my thought.
Well, there's another way to look at it, and that's you're putting a dock where a dock shouldn't go, on a very narrow channel that goes down practically to mud.
We just approved 82, and it goes to total mud too, right there.
That's true. That's true. But I voted against that one.
Okay, I think I know where you stand, where my vice chairman stands on this.
Do you want to poll the board?
I think we need to poll the board.
So I just have a couple more thoughts here. So, I appreciate you putting those elevations in, like we requested. But it would, and of course, there's a kind of a feeling that as soon as the dock sits on the soil, there's sufficient water depth that the channel's still usable. But is it possible to define what the water depth is in the middle of the channel when the dock first sits on the soil?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd have to go down to the site and I'd have to look at the,
Well, it might be useful.
yeah.
And then the other thought that came to mind was, so the ledge is the problem. So, I mean, I hesitate to mention this because I'm kind of new here, but is the velocity of flow so low that you could gravel fill, make the ledge more suitable by establishing a pad of gravel on the ledge for the DEP, for the flow?
I don't think DEP.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
No way?
DEP would not approve. It has to be water dependent if you're putting instead of fill in and,
Okay,
yeah.
all right,
No, it's a reasonable question though.
all right. Okay.
Okay, so I think everybody's pretty much spoken, and the question is, are we willing to accept that we're modify that length based on no other reasonable, as worded? I guess I am. And the question is, what are the voting members of the board? I know one who isn't.
Well, I don't think you have enough information on the type of dock materials and what kind of floats can be put in there, for one thing. That could meet that restriction.
I would tend to agree with Nina on that. Just for now, I think I'm not sure we have enough information to satisfy the ordinance, really. Is this the only reasonable alternative?
Yeah.
I don't think that's been fully explored, to be
Sure.
honest. I know that there is the ledge there, but for our purposes of approving, I think it needs to be shown by the applicant that this is the only reasonable alternative and that the materials being used is probably the less impact option, before at least granting the waiver, so to speak. And if it's,
Sure.
is it 4 feet, is it 10 feet, can we get maybe more specific numbers on.
As far as how far the.
Like, what are we granting as far as a modification?
Yeah, well, that's, again, I apologize, because I would have certainly submitted that information, but again, I was going on the premise of going across. I wasn't even prepared to say, to
Right.
ask that you modify it, but now that I know that we're sort of looking at, I guess you're saying the most narrow portion is
It's really those two spots, I guess.
what we need to
Yeah.
address, certainly.
Because if we're gonna be granting some sort of modification, it would really only be, you'd be speaking to those two lengths, I guess.
Correct.
And,
So, I'm afraid, can we ask her to come back?
Sure.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So, should we continue deliberation, but we already opened and closed the public hearing, so it'll be continued deliberation in
Right.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
So, see you in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Sorry. Thank you. Okay, well. Okay, item number 2 is item 180602, Matthew and Donna Enoch, Sebago Techniques Authors Agent. And we've made some new mods, Mr. Doe.
Couple. Thank you. Steve Doe from Sebago Technics. I know this is a public hearing. I just want to update you.
I haven't opened it yet, so it's
Okay.
still you telling us.
Okay, so the board had a couple questions at the last meeting, and I had since spoken with the Enochs, and the original application had either a boulder wall or a retaining wall. Talking with them, they want to go with the retaining wall. We're not saving any on lot coverage by that, because we really need some substantial size wall there. But anyway, I modified the plan to show the wall, and I've also included a detail in that, and I've actually shown that on this plan. It's in your package, but I've actually added it to this rendering. So it's a dry stacked wall, 2 feet in height, with a gravel backfill. I know there was questions from Larry regarding, water movement and stuff through that. So it is dry laid, water's gonna move right through that wall. And then Nina had some questions regarding the driveway and the one we're removing and what's the new lot coverage in the shoreland zone. And there's actually less coverage with the new layout, we're about 108 square feet less with this driveway compared to what existed down in that location.
When you say what existed, you said the driveway was taken out?
It was taken out.
When was
Portions
it?
was taken out. I'd have to talk to Warner. I think it was last year. He's coming back in.
Question, Warner?
Yes.
When was that driveway taken out on the Enoch property?
I'd have to look back at the permit record to see when we issued the permit for the wall, the foundation work.
Well, the question I'm going to ask is, was it within a year?
Right. And it all hasn't been removed. Some of it's still there. You can park a car in there now, but they closed off a portion of it right in here, so you can still park your car in that area.
I understand that, but I'm considering grandfathering, whether you still have the grandfathering to be able to use that square footage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can get you the specific, the specific date of, when the permit was issued. I do believe it's been beyond a year, but I'll confirm that with the permit record. Certainly when the permit was issued, and we should have on record when the inspections were done. So I can get that info for you.
But if it's been more than a year, then it's no longer grandfathered. Can you use that square footage for the driveway, the new drive?
I think we need to look into Article 8 on the non-conformance section.
Has the driveway been removed, and in what sense are you saying it's some portion that has been removed. I
So-
don't understand the removal.
What they
Verb
did
here.
is this driveway here went all the way into the basement. This went off,
The garage has been sealed off.
the garage has
That-
been
that I
sealed off,
understand.
and they filled up
That's
where
right.
the garage
So-
doors
so-
was.
So that the patio,
The little stone
the
patio.
little stone patio
is sitting-
used to be driveway,
Used to be driveway, is now,
but that patio is also impervious.
But they
Yes.
didn't have a permit to put in that patio.
I'm
Yeah, they didn't
just
have a
saying
permit to put that in.
It's
it's existing.
separate issue,
Right,
Right.
separate issue. It is existing impervious surface
correct,
today.
correct.
I'm questioning the need to go back to figure out when the permit was pulled and when the inspection was done. Are we saying that if that was 3 years ago, is there less impervious surface today than is accounted for in this application?
Yes, there was
Okay,
less, because
all right.
that only happened last year. I believe it was last year that they closed that up, did some filling, and left some of the driveway there.
But some of it is no longer impervious, some of it is no
Some of
longer,
it's
some of it's
grass.
lawn now. Okay,
Exactly,
thank you.
yeah. But kind of the whole goal of this is to create a safer situation instead of backing out onto Ocean Avenue. I understand Nina's concern about that, but it really comes down to safety. The town is also planning on putting a sidewalk in through here. And with the existing driveway as it is, there's gonna be a 50-foot curb cut. Whereas with this plan, there'll only be a 20-foot curb cut. Because they still have that wide of a curb cut, which is about 40, 50 feet. And so the sidewalk's gonna have to come from here and there, and then they have 40 feet of people walking where cars could be backing out.
No, I don't think anybody's
We're
Okay.
there,
questioning that.
All right.
All we're questioning is the accuracy of the application,
Okay,
that specific
Excuse me.
data.
okay.
And if the answer is, yeah, it'll happen within a year, then I think you're gonna come back and say the information is exactly accurate. And if it's not, that there may be an adjustment and it still
Yeah.
may be the right thing to do.
Okay.
yeah.
That-
My question then is, where they're parking now, where there's a sidewalk, is there sidewalk going to be in the parking area they're parking in now?
There's no sidewalk there today.
No, I know, but where it's proposed. Because, the parking area they have right now may be partially owned by
It
the
is.
town.
And almost every lot heading back into Dock Square is the same way. There's a
Same as
lot
the
of-
Nonantum
same-
parking area.
All those
that we
situations
just went
along
through.
that whole street are like that. And even as you head further down Ocean Avenue, you have the same situation.
But you're not counting the surface area.
I'm not counting the
Of the
surface area right
town.
away. I'm not counting that in my
Okay.
calculations.
All right.
You've added in a grass strip in the
Yes.
center, which decreases the impervious
Correct.
surface. Could you expand that grass strip? Could it go in other parts as well? Or is there another surface that would
We
allow
may
you to
be
do that?
able to, well, from a parking space standpoint, we have to have 10 by 20 for a parking space. We need 2 for the property, and that has to be all impervious. So if I took 20 feet, I could say that's my 20-foot space, and then I could extend these strips to there, which would gain me a little bit, and maybe I can even narrow those. I could narrow those slightly. They're like 3.5 feet. I could maybe get 3 feet and still not have a car or drive off of there. So there are some things I could probably tweak in there if we find out that it was over a year ago.
You're proposing an asphalt surface?
It'll probably be pavers, but it'll be a hard surface.
Are those pavers that have grass growing in them, are
Doesn't
they
matter.
considered impervious as well?
Those are considered impervious
They are,
anyway.
okay.
Yeah,
All right, never mind.
So just to add a little more on the question regarding just, the 1 year question. So I think the section that you want to look at, Nina, that you were talking about, it's in Article 8.8.
Right.
8.8B, which is the resumption prohibited section, talks about non-conforming uses. It says lot building or structure in or on which a non-conforming use is discontinued for a period exceeding 1 year, or which is superseded by a conforming use, may not be again be devoted to a non-conforming use, except that the planning board may, for good cause shown by the applicant, grant up to a 1-year extension to that time period.
Right.
So, I think it's up to the board to decide. I mean, does that language really fit with this? I mean, it's not perfect, but I think,
I think it would fit with it, but I'd like to know what the dates
wanna know
were.
what the date
Because
is.
if we're going to grant that extension, we need to know.
what the dates are.
I have another question that doesn't relate to that, but relates to the portico you want to put over the entryway. Okay, I was thinking about that, and I started to look up case law, and I think we have a problem in our definitions in that they're not clear. I do not believe that external stairs become part of the structure. And I'll tell you why. This could lead to some really serious problems with people playing with the footage of non-conforming spaces. One of the things they could do is, since anyone can add external stairs, they could add external stairs up to a second floor, and then a year later decide they want to take that square footage and basically enclose a porch. I think it could lead to problems in the future. I believe that a portico, from looking at case law, could be what they call an expansion of a natural use, the same way that you put up mailboxes and porch lights, as long as there are not any walls to it. I think you could put a portico over an entryway. There's no definitive case law on that, but there is some in Maine and New Hampshire that suggests there are expansions of natural uses like that. I just don't want to go about it by saying that you can take the external stairs footage and call that structure and use that to add dimension to a non-conforming structure.
Nina, can I ask a question? I read the application to say that the stairs were being removed in order to remove the associated impervious surface. And the impervious, the overhang was also accounting for that, and that was the trade. We weren't talking about an expansion of the volume of the structure.
Yeah, but what you're doing is you're trading that square footage.
Yeah, we're kind of what Nina's saying, we're trading the square footage of the stairs that are being removed in area
Yes.
and adding to the cover over the front door, the 6 square feet.
And why is that cover
There's no,
significant?
there is none now. In other words, there's no really overhang over the front door.
And so it will then contribute to the impervious surface calculation?
Well, that's the question.
No, only, there's no increase because we're taking the stairs.
No,
Oh.
forget it. Put the stairs aside for a
Okay.
second. You want to put that overhang in there.
Yes.
Why are you worried about it?
Why am I worried about it?
Why do you have to be concerned for it?
It's adding to the non-conforming structure.
But this is what I'm saying, is I don't think it is.
I'm trying to ask you, what about it is non-conforming?
It's within the 75-foot setback.
Okay, all right. You're saying you are worried about expanding the structure, the footprint of
The
the structure.
footprint of the structure is within 75 feet.
So we do have within our definitions, we have a definition of building footprint. And building footprint says it's the area of a lot covered by all portions of any buildings and or detached or attached accessory structures, including but not limited to garages, sheds, decks, porches, bulkhead entrances, steps, cantilevered sections, and roof overhangs.
Yeah, but it doesn't say external steps.
It says steps.
Steps.
I would assume that, I mean, when we're talking about building footprint, that's external.
I think historically, on any project we've ever done, we've always counted, if it's a wood stair
Right.
on a structure, it's always been
The
counted
definition.
as area of the structure.
What I'm concerned about is if we use that argument and trade those stair footage for the portico footage, is what's to keep, you know, setting a precedent, what's to keep someone from saying, oh, I want a porch. First, I'm gonna put in some stairs because I'm allowed to put in external stairs.
But under this definition, under building footprint, it's an expansion of the, it's an expansion of the structure. I mean, we've had situations like this where we've had, structures that have been right up to, that were built right up to the setback lines, and property owners, decided they wanted to add a secondary door, not the principal egress, that's required by code, but a secondary door. And the question has come up, well, where are the stairs going to go? And the stairs, as being part of building footprint, would have extended into the setback.
But according to A3, steps to access ground or second floor are not expansion,
They're not expansion of use,
not expansion of use.
expansion of structure.
So you do consider them expansion of structure?
Expansion of structure, but not expansion of use. And as I understand it, when that particular exemption was put in, it was primarily to address the need for emergency egress stairs that were for the bed and breakfasts, and that where bed and breakfasts were a non-conforming use, they were, boards in the past were trying to deal with how do we allow for additional square footage to be added, but not have it be declared an expansion of use. And I think that was my understanding, that was the fix, is that they said that, all right, stairs are not an expansion of use, it's still an expansion of structure, but it doesn't make a non-conforming use more non-conforming by just adding, a set of stairs. And again, that's how it was conveyed to me, that it was a how do we deal with a required egress issue?
But if your structure was already at its max, then you couldn't add stairs.
And again, what I understood, it was primarily dealing with the second floor, these second floor stairs, so the fire escapes and things like that that you were dealing with. Not saying that the fix was perfect, but again, that's what I understood was the intent, was to deal with those types of situations. But we have had, again, situations, where, we're adding a required landing, and a set of steps based on building footprint would have been an expansion, would have been an expansion of the structure. And that if it was going into the setback, would have been wouldn't have been a permissible expansion. But to your point, it makes perfect sense, that if someone were to come along and to add a door, we would say, well, you have to add, by building code, you have to have a landing, you have to have a set of steps, and I completely see your point that you don't want someone to then turn around and say, oh, I've got this additional, 36 square feet now, from this landing, and a little bit more for the step, and trade that off, for something else. Yeah, I mean that.
Okay, so where are we? I mean, we need to know the dates
Yep.
before we can approve at this point.
I think we're saying there's a question about the impervious surface.
Yes.
Whether or not this application is going to increase it.
Yes.
The dates may show that it's not an issue, or there may be some other way of dealing with that.
Mhm.
That's the question.
So that's the question
Yeah,
for you, Steve.
so I gotta basically sit down with Warner, find out what that date is, and come back to you.
Come back with
See
the
if we're
impervious
good or if we
surface.
gotta modify something.
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right.
But also, is there a setback issue? I think I heard you say that the well, portico is gonna encroach on the 75-foot setback? Is that,
No, the whole
The whole
structure.
structure's in the 75 foot.
That's why we're here.
so this is going to?
It's entirely not gonna change anything, it's completely non-conforming, it's gonna stay that way.
Okay. All right, so does the portico increase the, well, okay, so the whole thing is not
The whole thing's not
Yeah.
conforming. Yeah.
Okay, so, see you next time.
No other questions? Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Any questions for us?
No, I think it's really just comes down to what the coverage of that driveway was and.
Yeah.
Okay, so we
Sounds
never,
good.
did we
Pardon?
open?
And when?
I
When,
don't
exactly,
think we
yeah.
opened the public hearing.
Okay, thank
so
you.
Therefore, we can do it next time. Right? Or do we, I mean,
We could do it this
We
time.
could
We could do it this time.
Why
Anybody,
don't we do it?
anyone wish to,
Yeah.
to speak on the public hearing here? Don't all rush, Mike. Okay, so I'm going to open and close the public hearing, so we just need to figure it out next time.
Okay.
All right? Thank you. So, our final item for this evening is 180201, Binnacle Hill Phase 2, the initial review of the final subdivision review. So, go, Mike.
Hi.
Introduce yourself and proceed.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Mike Tadema Wieland. I'm a civil engineer with Paradigm Consultants. I'm here with Ralph Austin, and the two of us are representing the developer of Binnacle Hill subdivision, Phase 2. Most of you will remember, I see we've got a couple of new members, but the board granted preliminary approval about a month ago on the 20th. And very shortly thereafter, we assembled a final subdivision application and submitted that. There are really very few changes to the final plan set from the set that was preliminarily approved. We did provide some additional information, including responses to what was the second round of peer review comments, as well as some updates to the homeowners association documents, and some information on the cost and financing of the project. We also submitted approvals from both the wastewater division on the sewer design, as well as the Kennebunkport and Wells Water District on the water design. So we're here tonight, as I understand it, to find that final application complete. So Ralph and I are happy to answer any questions that you have. But otherwise, we're looking forward to a finding of complete application and schedule of a public hearing for final approval. Thanks very much.
Okay. Couple questions that I noticed, because I was reviewing the Binnacle Hill 1 final letter. I noticed that Binnacle Hill 1, we mentioned an MDOT approval. Did we not need it because we're not connecting to, I mean, we had an MDOT approval to connect to New Bedford Road. Since we're connecting to the other one, do we not need the MDOT approval, or what?
Yeah, so this has connection to you know, an existing planned right of way that was designed there, as well as to sort of the Hinchy Way. So you're right. There's no driveway entrance or entrance permit per se that would be required for this.
You know, saw this in the original
Yep.
one and make sure it wasn't something. Okay. And again, something simple. We need officially to ask Werner, does he agree with the cost estimate?
Sorry. Process-wise, typically what we ask for whenever it comes time to deal with the letter of credit, we look at, we don't necessarily look at what cost estimates in terms of what's been proposed, but we typically ask for to see the actual contract, between the developer and the subcontractor who's going to be doing the work, and so we look to see that that the financing is in place for what the actual end result numbers are.
Okay,
So,
but reading the last one from Binnacle Hill 1 that I might have written or David might have written it, I don't know, but it said, specifically had the words that the code enforcement
right.
agreed with the estimate.
Yep. I mean, the numbers that they've provided, fall in line with what we've typically seen for construction cost estimates. Yeah.
That's what I wanted.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. The other thing I was noticing, and just reading all of the owner stuff on the Pinnacle Hill agreement and everything, have you specifically excluded our friends over here that they are not members, do not need to be known to be members of the Pinnacle Hill Association?
I believe so. I'll let Ralph answer that since he drafted the document.
So.
The way it's worded, the members of the association are the owners of the specific numbered lots within the subdivision, but if it would make the board more comfortable or the abutters more comfortable, I can add very specific language in there that those lots along Hinchy Way are not part of the association, nor do they bear any responsibility for maintenance costs. So I mean, that's easy to add.
That's good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, thank you. Okay. And the 12-foot versus 20 versus 14-foot, you, I believe, said if the fire chief loves it, you do too. So you're going to modify the drawings to reflect that?
After we left the meeting about a month ago, we reached out to the fire chief, and when we submitted the final application, we had not heard back.
Right.
Since that time, we have, and he's okay with a 12-foot wide section for the entire length. So yes,
Okay. So
the drawings will be
when
revised.
we see the final drawings, we sign off. You'll
Exactly.
have done that.
Sure.
Good. Okay.
That's great, good news. How about moving that gate? Was that moved? So
Yeah.
that, they're nervous about the what's the word I'm looking for? The angle.
Yeah,
the slope.
the slope. So the gate's not been moved. We looked at pushing it as far up the hill as possible, but we don't want it in the public right of way. That's not going to be public infrastructure. It's going to be owned by the homeowners association. It should be on land that is controlled by the homeowners association. And in addition to that, by moving it up, you're reducing sort of the turning area for a vehicle to turn around, which is exactly the point of the hammerhead to begin with. So we understand the concern. It's an emergency access gate. It's not an area that any vehicle is going to be in very much of the time. And it's going to be at very low speeds, and so personally, I don't see a great issue with the grade there. But we heard the comments from the abutters, and we looked at it, and frankly, we think it's in the best spot. It's in the most practical spot, given the conditions.
Thank you.
I have one more question for my friend Ralph. You provided Obviously, you have a nice purchase and sales for the bulk of the property. You indicated that the last 20-foot right-of-way of Henchy Way, that you're going to be getting it from the Richies.
Yep.
Do we have a PNS, or could we get the PNS?
Sure, we can do
on
that. I didn't realize I submitted the full PNS for the bulk of the property. What I typically do is submit a memorandum, but yeah, we can.
For completeness.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's called a redacted agreement. We take out the monetary details and things like that. But yeah, well, we can submit that.
Thank you.
I don't think you did submit a PNS copy. I think you submitted an affidavit.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I said. I did not submit the PNS
Right.
for the bulk of the property.
So I guess he wants, all we need then would be a comparable affidavit for the Richies.
No, I think you really need the PNS.
For the
Yeah,
Richies.
a redacted one is fine.
Yeah,
but
I'll submit whatever the majority of the board
That
wants.
sounds
We've
good.
done the affidavit in the past, but if you want the redacted PNS, that's fine.
Yeah,
Please,
I mean, we need it for the DEP anyway, so.
yeah. The other question I had about that is, on the GIS maps, Henchy doesn't show as part of the property, Henchy Way. But it's a private road, right?
Correct.
And so the property description will include Henchy Way on the deeds and everything.
Yes, I'm not sure I follow the question. Henchy Way is owned by the Richies. They will be conveying that to.
The lower part of Henchy Way.
The lower part, yeah, the lower part.
And the upper part of that
Is
is
already
covered
part
by
of
the
the property.
PNS, right, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Just making notes.
okay.
And once we have a final, once we have a final plan with corrected property lines, then, that electronic version, is submitted to our GIS consultant, and then, it'll be those lines that'll be used to update the tax, the online GIS tax maps.
It's just the roads don't show in those lines. So
Yep.
it's, confusing sometimes.
Yep.
So
It's always a work in progress.
Yeah, any other comments?
I
Ed?
have a couple of questions, Mike. The first one is with respect to you gave a good description of why there wasn't an issue with headlights interfering. And it talked about existing vegetation as being the barrier in a couple of the cases. It didn't specify whether that was evergreen vegetation.
I think some of it, I think it's a mix.
You take my point, right? In the
It's this
wintertime, is
area.
it sufficient?
I'm sorry?
Is a sufficient barrier in the wintertime?
Sure. I understand it. If you read the bulk of my analysis there, it goes on to talk about how this is sort of a downward slope,
Right, the land is blocking it for the most part.
and the land blocks it for the most
But-
part.
but-
And then in addition to that,
On 320 Kings Highway rear and 6 Ocean,
yeah,
you're relying on the vegetation.
in addition to
Right.
sort of the slope of the land blocking that. And really, these properties aren't right in line with that either, right?
I take your point.
Yeah.
I just don't want to accept an answer that says, yeah, for some of the year, they're not going to have, we had this big harangue about whether or not they were going to get flooded with cars' headlights. I just don't want to let that go. If there is not vegetation, if there is an issue, will it be covered by some barrier that's planted or constructed?
Right, so my analysis,
Yes.
which I provided, concludes that it's not gonna be an issue. Now, whether or not, it's up to you to decide, I guess, whether or not you agree with that, but,
I just want you to tell me that the vegetation is going to be sufficient in the wintertime.
I believe the combination of factors here
Yes.
are gonna result in little to no glare or headlight trespass on those houses.
The issue with that is your diagram shows the headlights straight ahead. It doesn't show a vehicle that's turning in the hammerhead where there's going to be angles that would go straight to those houses.
Yeah, I understand your point. I think unless someone is lost, there's gonna be almost no one coming in there at night and turning around.
Especially in the wintertime, when that gate's probably gonna have snow near it, or.
Yeah.
But won't there be a pile of snow at the end of that hammerhead that would block the light?
That's true as well, I guess.
Not unless it snows.
What about global warming? No, it never snows up here. No, all right, yeah, we'll see that maybe the 10 Ocean is gonna possibly get.
If somebody does the
Yes, when you
hammerhead
guys
turn, you're
turning
going to
in the
see those
hammerhead.
angles.
There would be, so it would depend on the existing vegetation blocking.
I had a second question, just, we talked about Timber Way being offered as a public street. I guess I'm wondering whether that's really gonna be practical. Is that the plan? I know there was a great concern about beach parking. And if it is made a public street, couldn't it be used for additional beach parking by the town?
So it is the intent of the developer to offer it as a public street. It's been designed to meet public street standards. It'll be constructed to public street standards. Whether or not parking would be allowed on the side of the street would be, I guess, a decision of the selectmen.
At the time of whether or not to
When
accept
they
the
accept
street?
it, Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So I can weigh in a little bit on that. I can tell you that the Board of Selectmen are, I think, taking a harder look at what subdivision roads, what type of criteria that they as a board are going to be using for deciding whether or not they're going to agree to put private roads on the warrant for potential public acceptance. So that's a kind of an in-process discussion. Right now, there isn't necessarily a set policy or set of guidelines that they use, but we're in the works in terms of developing some of that language that will fit with direction that they've given. So stay tuned. But
Thank you. Neil, do you have any questions?
Yeah, with respect to the buffer on, the proposed buffer on lot 21, going through the restated and amended declaration of covenants, and maybe this is a better question for Ralph. It looks like you refer to lots 17, 18, and 19 that contain the forested buffer, and there's certain restrictions in there, but it doesn't anywhere in this provide anything about lot 21. And I'm wondering, should this be amended to?
Yes, and it will be. That
Okay.
we weren't quite on the same page at the same time. So yeah, there will be, in addition to the covenants that will, one, require that buffer, and it'll be the responsibility of the owner of lot 21 to maintain that. But the association would have enforcement rights if the buffer was not maintained.
Or if they just went and cut everything down, there would be.
Well, that's the same, yeah, that's, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay. So, George or Larry, do you have things you'd like to add?
Well, I just had a couple of questions, maybe they're clarified somewhere, I just didn't see, I don't know. But I noticed the Timber Way goes across some wetland areas in a half a dozen places, I guess. So is it worth showing your typical detail for how you're going to make sure the road stays level? Because, I mean, the soil's gonna be quite soft there, right? It's gonna tend to. well, depress with weight of the road as well as traffic. So I'm just thinking, are you gonna have some rock filling or piling that you use to cross those wetland areas?
Right, so the typical details, so the road section that's shown is sufficient for wetland areas, sufficient for upland areas in this situation. The soils out here, there are wetland areas, but it's not like a mucky clay or something like that, like you might find on another site. The wetland areas here are the result of shallow bedrock. So it's actually a fairly sandy soil, but with shallow bedrock, so the water gets perched on top of it, which is why that's the reason for all the wetland areas here. It's sort of a hummocky landscape with pits and mounds, and rock outcroppings, and the water can sort of get trapped in those areas, and so that's sort of so it's not necessarily the soft ground that's a concern out here. In those situations, there are things you can do to prevent sort of the road sinking, and usually it's putting in a geotextile fabric or something like that on the subgrade, not necessarily like a piling or a rock fill or something like that. But it's not anticipated to be necessary here. During construction, so the contractor would, if the contractor does come upon a soft area or something like that, then it would be investigated a little further, and we would make a call whether or not to put that geotextile down.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a few other questions on, I guess on drawing C 3.2 and 3.3, you show a typical sewer and freshwater piping cross-section, but I didn't see a dimension between those two pipes. And I did find some, while I was surfing online, I found some main specification that says you need 10 feet between a sewer pipe and a freshwater pipe.
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is a horizontal separation.
Yes, horizontal separation.
And what sheets, I'm sorry, what sheets were you?
I think it's 3.2 and 3.3.
Yeah, so I show a crossing detail on 3.2 where there's that's a vertical separation.
Yeah, but there's also a horizontal one, because you got a, on 3.2.
I understand.
You've got the water main, and then you got the sewer mains, the lower left-hand corner. I'm just saying that, you know.
Larry, I know it's hard, but you need to get close to the microphone.
Oh, sorry. So on, yeah, so the lower left-hand corner on 3.2.
Sewer service connection with crossing?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm having to find, so if you could put a dimension between the center lines of those would be nice.
Yeah, so that's a typical detail. It's not meant to be to scale, or so water and sewer, the horizontal alignment of the water and sewer is shown on the plan and profile sheets, and there is 10 feet of separation between the two on those sheets. So
okay.
I don't necessarily want the contractor installing
all right.
the
Well,
horizontal
yeah, exactly.
alignment based on those details. So.
Okay, so we just didn't see that particular sheet, I guess. Okay, yeah, all right, good. So, I guess my last question, so I know this is pretty shallow, right? I mean, the elevation of this, typical elevation is about 12 feet above mean low water. So does the highest astronomical tide have any effect on, say, the drainage backing up, you know, the drainage canals? I mean, I guess you must have looked at that.
Right, yeah, so we would consider the flood zone in that case, and no, so that there's no, so that I think the areas where we may run into, or you could run into potential projects are the areas where we're putting these stormwater management areas. So one here, which is actually relatively high compared to downstream, and all these houses are lower. This area here, this open space area between lots 20 and 21. So again, the areas where we're putting these, there's no real concern of flooding, and I don't think there's a flood zone on this property. So.
Okay, I was just wondering if the highest astronomical tide caused any kind of a backup in the drainage system that could then kind of cascade back into the development, but I don't really know, just asking.
Yeah, no,
whether the
not
drainage is an
anticipated,
issue.
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. George, did you have anything?
Sorry, I had one more question. And I guess since this isn't a public hearing, one of us needs to raise the question, but is there a plan to provide some sort of landscaping or a landscaping plan for the buffer between lot 21 and the Miller property?
Yeah, so the subdivision plan, so we've added the buffer, we've already talked about it. If I crafted a note and put it on the plan, and if you read it, you probably get the sense that I'm trying to give take. But we've allowed for the developer to plant sort of appropriate species, and what I don't want to do is I don't want to produce a plan that shows X number of this species and Y number of this species, and then hold some future lot owner to having that number and that type of species on their lot for forever. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think we need to allow them some flexibility in what they do, and some species may take well to that, but others may not. So I think our intent is to provide a healthy visual screen, but again, we'd like to offer some flexibility, particularly to the future lot owner. So, I mean, if the board has a suggestion or an idea how to get there, certainly we'll take it into account.
I guess, would it be, my understanding is that the Millers and the developer have been in contact throughout this process, so maybe it would be a good idea to discuss that plan. I know it's, you want to allow for that flexibility, but also, if there's a possibility to try and maybe come to a clearer idea as to what that may be, not necessarily defining it to X number of species, but just kind of provide maybe a little more clarity. I did see the note on the plan. It's helpful, it's instructive, that it's there in the plan. It's very helpful.
Yeah, we can I think we can come up with some more specificity and try to get there.
All right.
We'll work on that.
Thanks.
So, anyone else wish to speak here? I guess that in that case we should probably entertain a motion to declare this final.
I'll make a motion to declare this complete.
Second.
In favor? I don't know where.
You had to step up.
Okay. Well, anyway, it passes, and we'll have the public hearing next time.
Yeah.
Which is becoming rapidly a very big meeting next time.
Can you put us first?
No, we like to have Ralph around.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor? Okay, well.